Well, all right. For today's adventures in poetry and culture, I'm reading from a book by a fellow named Newman Levy, who was brought to my attention by my good friend Bryce Moss in this book called Opera Guide. If you're familiar with the video Everything You Wanted to Know About Opera in 10 Minutes, this is a 1923 version of that, sort of. And before we start, if you see a little ghost over my shoulder here, everything will be revealed. Last night, the boss slipped me a ticket for one of them opera shows, and the name of the show is called Hamlet. So I breaks out my glad rags and goes. Well, it's gloom from the moment it opens till the time the theater shuts. And the company's half of them loony and the rest of the cast is all nuts. The tenor's a goof known as Hamlet, but his real name's George W. Gloom. He's a regular life of the party. He's as jolly and gay as a tomb. His old man was king of the Denmarks, and the poor simp's gone weak in the bean, for his dad has been croaked by his uncle, who right afterward marries the queen. So young Hamlet just hangs around sad-like, and he talks to himself like a nut. But as yet he ain't hep that his father was bumped off by his uncle, the mutt. One night he slips out of the castle and goes on the roof for some air, when along comes the ghost of his father, and he shoots him an earful of fear. That lowlife your uncle has croaked me, and he went off and married your ma. Will you let that rat hand you the ha-ha? Says Hamlet. Just notice me, pa. Young Ham has a frail called Ophelia, and her pop is a dreary old goof, and they can't dope why Hamlet's gone batty. They don't know what he's seen on the roof. Well, Ham goes and calls on his mother, and he bawls the old girl out her fare, and then sees something move in the curtains, and he thinks that the uncle is there. So he jabs with his sword through the curtain, and he cries, "Now we're even, my lad." But it isn't the king, but Polonius, and he's killed poor Ophelia's old dad. Then Ophelia, poor kid, goes daffy when she hears how her old man is crowned, and she goes round singing like crazy till she walks in the lake and gets drowned. There's this jolly old scene in the graveyard where Prince Hamlet gets into a scrap with Ophelia's big brother Laertes, who wants to mess up Hamlet's map. Then the king says, "Now, boys, don't act nasty. I know how to fight this thing out. I've got some tin swords at the castle, and we'll frame up a nice friendly bout." Then he winks at Laertes and whispers, "We'll knock this here nut for a ghoul. I'll smear up his sword with some poison and make that Hamlet look like a fool." So they pull off the bout like they planned it, but the king thinks his scheme may slip up, so he orders a cold drink for Hamlet, and some poison he sneaks in the cup. Then Ham and Laertes start fighting, and the king slips Laertes a wink, but the queen, she ain't wise to what's doing, and she swallows the king's poison drink. Then Hamlet gets stuck in the shoulder and sees how he's framed by the start, and he switches the swords on Laertes, and he stabs the poor bum through the heart. Then he runs his sword right through his uncle, and he says, "Well, let's call it a day." Then the queen dies, the king dies, and Ham dies. I calls it a hell of a play.